You folks are leaving, right now.
We're having brunch with our family. Can you tell us what we've done wrong?
I got a call about a disturbance. You need to vacate this restaurant.
Disturbance? We're sitting with our 2 young children.
Who said we disturbed anyone?
That's not your concern. Leave now or this becomes an arrest.
Officer Edward Killough believed he was enforcing order. As a 15-year veteran of the Minneapolis Police Department, he responded to disturbance calls with practiced efficiency, especially at upscale establishments where management valued what he termed maintaining standards. When dispatch relayed a complaint from Frank Evans' restaurant about disruptive patrons on a crisp Saturday morning in early March, he arrived within 7 minutes. But the moment he walked through those doors and spotted a black family seated quietly in a corner booth, every biased instinct honed over 15 years told him exactly who the problem was. They didn't match the restaurant's typical demographic. Their presence had apparently unsettled someone enough to summon law enforcement, and in Killough's prejudiced calculus, that justified removal. What Killough had forgotten, what his overconfidence had made him ignore, was the small device clipped to his uniform. His body camera had activated automatically when he stepped from his patrol car, recording everything in high-definition clarity with crystal-clear audio. Every word he spoke, every gesture he made, every frame of racial profiling captured by his own equipment. The technology designed to shield officers from false accusations would become the instrument that dismantled his career and cost the city $7 million. Before we dive deeper into what happened next, if you are ready to see institutional racism taken down, like this video and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. And if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button right now because stories like these deserve to be heard, and your support helps bring more truth to light. Also, you won't want to miss tomorrow's story of cops messing with the wrong people and finding out. Edward Killough had served the Minneapolis Police Department for 15 years, accumulating what his supervisors characterized as a dependable track record of community engagement. Beneath that veneer, however, lay 28 complaints filed over 13 years by citizens alleging discriminatory treatment and harassment of minorities in public establishments. Each grievance had passed through internal affairs review and been dismissed as misinterpretation or procedural confusion. Killough had learned the system's protection mechanisms. As long as he claimed to be responding to business requests or citizen reports, his department shielded him from accountability. The Minneapolis Police Department had mandated body cameras 4 years prior, following a succession of misconduct allegations that garnered national attention. Officers were required to activate cameras for all civilian interactions, all service calls, and all enforcement activities. The policy was explicit. Failure to activate body cameras could trigger disciplinary measures, though in practice, officers occasionally forgot activation or reported device malfunctions during critical moments. Killough himself had failed to activate his camera on at least 17 documented occasions over the previous 4 years, always during interactions that subsequently generated formal complaints. But on this Saturday morning, whether from routine habit or misplaced confidence that his actions carried legitimacy, Killough had activated his body camera when he exited his vehicle. That single decision would prove catastrophic. Dr. James Hawthorne, 43, practiced pediatric medicine at Minneapolis General Hospital. His wife, Lisa Hawthorne, 41, worked as a senior attorney at Caldwell and Associates, one of the city's most respected corporate law firms. They resided in Minneapolis's affluent Riverside district and were raising their children 10-year-old Sophia and 7-year-old Daniel with emphasis on education, dignity, and self-worth. They were accomplished professionals who contributed meaningfully to their community. They were also Black, which meant they navigated discrimination as a constant, exhausting reality. The Saturday morning had unfolded beautifully. The Hawthorne family attended early service at Community Fellowship Church, then decided on brunch at Frank Evans' Restaurant, a local establishment known for its Sunday brunches and elegant atmosphere. They had dined there once before, 6 months earlier, without incident. When they arrived at 10:45, the restaurant hummed with the weekend crowd. They were seated at a booth near the window overlooking the street, ordered coffee and juice for the children, and conversed quietly, while Sophia and Daniel drew pictures on their paper placemats. Everything had been ordinary, peaceful, unremarkable, until the couple, 3 booths away, began staring. Dr. Hawthorne noticed the attention but dismissed it, focusing instead on his family. The staring intensified, accompanied by whispered exchanges and gestures in their direction. Then the white couple rose from their booth, walked deliberately to the host station, and spoke in urgent tones with someone who appeared to be a floor manager. 8 minutes later, Officer Edward Killough pushed through the entrance, his body camera activated and recording from chest height, capturing everything at eye level as he surveyed the dining room. Killough's body camera footage would later reveal precisely what he observed upon entry: a tranquil dining space filled with families enjoying meals, soft conversations layering over background music, children laughing at nearby tables. The camera panned across the restaurant as Killough scanned the space methodically. When the lens settled on the Hawthorne family, the only black customers visible in the entire establishment, Killough moved directly toward them without hesitation. The footage captured his approach. His hand drifted to rest on his duty belt. His posture hardened into something aggressive, authoritative, designed to intimidate. He stopped at their table, looming over them from a standing position while they sat. The body camera recorded what happened next from Killough's perspective. The Hawthorne family's faces turning upward in confusion. The moment shock registered across their expressions, the instinctive fear that flickered in their eyes. Dr. Hawthorne set down his coffee cup carefully, his hands trembling slightly despite his attempt at composure. The body camera's microphone captured the tremor in his voice when he spoke, asking what they had done wrong. What complaint had been made? The camera recorded his hand reaching instinctively toward his son's shoulder, a protective gesture clearly visible in the frame. Killough responded that he had received reports of a disturbance. The camera recorded his aggressive tone, the way he positioned himself to dominate the interaction physically. He instructed them to vacate the premises immediately. Lisa Hawthorne's voice carried the waver of someone whose legal expertise meant nothing in this moment of raw discrimination. She asked what disturbance they had allegedly caused, what specific behavior had prompted a complaint. Her training as an attorney should have prepared her for confrontation, but the body camera captured her, wiping her eyes quickly, fighting to maintain dignity in front of her children. The footage recorded Tyler beginning to cry quietly, his small voice asking his mother what was wrong. It captured Sophia gripping her father's arm, her face showing confusion, transforming into fear. Killough dismissed their questions curtly. The microphone picked up every word with perfect clarity. He informed them their concerns were irrelevant. They could leave voluntarily or face arrest for trespassing. Dr. Hawthorne's voice cracked. The body camera recorded him asking again what they had done, mentioning that they had ordered food and paid for drinks, asking for any specific complaint or behavior that justified this confrontation. The camera captured Daniel looking up at his father, the 9-year-old's face showing the terrible moment when a child realizes something is deeply, frighteningly wrong. Killough's tone hardened further. The threat was barely concealed now, recorded in perfect audio quality. The family needed to leave the establishment immediately, or he would arrest them all for trespassing and creating a public disturbance. Lisa pulled her daughter close, her own composure fracturing. The body camera recorded everything from Killough's vantage point. The humiliation of a family being threatened with arrest for the offense of eating brunch, all captured by the officer's own equipment. Before Dr. Hawthorne could formulate a response, a voice cut sharply through the tension from somewhere off camera. The body camera swiveled as Killough turned his head, the frame jerking slightly before settling on Victor Langford, CEO of the Frank Evans Restaurant Group, emerging from the executive office suite located on the restaurant's second floor. Langford, a white man in his early 60s who had built the restaurant chain over 32 years, moved quickly down the stairs, his expression registering alarm and anger as he assessed the scene. Killough's confidence remained intact. The camera steadied as he faced Langford directly. He explained that he had received a disturbance call and was handling the situation appropriately. Langford stepped closer, now centered in the body camera's frame. He asked who had called in a disturbance. He stated he had been reviewing quarterly reports in his office and no staff member had informed him of any problem requiring police intervention. Morrison gestured vaguely. The movement was captured clearly by his own camera. He repeated that one of the restaurant's customers had called in a complaint about these people causing disruption. The body camera recorded Langford walking past Killough toward the booth, the frame following his movement as Killough tracked him visually. Langford addressed the Hawthornes directly, asking if they had been causing any problems or disturbances. Dr. Hawthorne's voice carried more steadiness now, anchored perhaps by the arrival of someone in authority who might actually listen. The camera captured his face as Killough observed the exchange. He explained they had been sitting quietly, eating with their children, bothering no one. Should police officers who remove customers from businesses based solely on their race face federal prosecution? Share your thoughts in the comments. This wasn't just harassment. This was an officer weaponizing his authority to enforce discrimination, and his own body camera was documenting every second. Langford's voice rose, clearly audible on Killough's body camera audio. He stated categorically that there had been no disturbance, and the family would not be leaving. They were paying customers who had done nothing wrong. The body camera captured Killough's hands tensing, visible at the bottom of the frame. He insisted he had received a legitimate complaint that required response. Langford demanded specifics. The camera showed him turning to face Killough squarely, his body language shifting into something protective, defiant. Killough's camera view shifted as he gestured toward an empty booth where the complaining couple had been seated. Langford interrupted before Killough could finish. The camera captured his posture changing, shoulders squaring, as he positioned himself physically between the officer and the Hawthorne family. He stated clearly that even if the complainants were still present, he did not remove paying customers because their presence made someone uncomfortable. This was his establishment, and everyone was welcome as long as they behaved respectfully and paid for their meals. The Hawthornes had done both. The body camera's microphone registered the dining room, falling silent. The footage captured several customers in the background, retrieving phones from pockets and bags. Though they remained unaware of the professional quality recording happening from Killough's own chest-mounted device, Killough stepped closer to Langford, the camera recording the attempted intimidation as Langford's face filled more of the frame. He suggested that if Langford refused to support police efforts to maintain order in his establishment, there could be consequences. Langford's voice rose sharply. The body camera's microphone captured every syllable with perfect clarity. He stated that Killough was attempting to forcibly remove a family who had committed no offense. That constituted discrimination, nothing less. The camera captured Killough's jaw clenching, visible as he glanced downward briefly before meeting Langford's eyes again. He suggested pointedly that Langford reconsider his position. The police department maintained a productive relationship with Frank Evans' restaurant. Langford wouldn't want that relationship to deteriorate. The threat was unmistakable in the recording. The camera captured Langford's expression changing, comprehension dawning about what Killough had just implied. Lisa's voice came from off-camera, and Killough's body camera swiveled to face her as she raised her smartphone. She identified herself as an attorney and informed Killough that she was recording the interaction. She stated clearly that he had just threatened a business owner for refusing to participate in racial discrimination. The family had broken no laws. If he arrested them, there would be substantial legal consequences. Killough's own body camera now recorded Lisa holding her phone steady despite her trembling hands, creating the ironic situation of two simultaneous recordings from different angles documenting the same discriminatory encounter. Killough ordered her to put the phone away or he would confiscate it as evidence. The camera captured his own threatening tone. Lisa asked what legal basis he had for confiscation. The camera showed her hands shaking, but holding the device firmly. She noted that recording police in public was constitutionally protected. He knew that. Langford stepped back into frame, positioning himself between Killough's camera and the family. He stated, as the owner of the establishment, that these customers were welcome and had committed no violation of any kind. He was formally asking Killough to leave his restaurant. The body camera recorded Killough standing motionless, captured the beat of silence as he processed what was happening, the realization that this was not unfolding according to pattern. He stated that both Langford and the family would regret this decision. The camera recorded his turn toward the exit, his walk across the dining room, the view bouncing slightly with each step. It captured the murmurs of relief and scattered applause from other customers as he departed. What Killough failed to comprehend as he left Frank Evans' restaurant was that his body camera had recorded everything, every discriminatory statement, every threatening gesture, every moment of the Hawthorne family's fear and humiliation. The very device designed to protect him from false allegations would become the primary evidence of his misconduct. Langford remained positioned between the departed officer's path and the Hawthorne family's booth for several seconds after Killough's exit, as though his physical presence could still shield them from what had just occurred. The body camera footage uploaded automatically to the department's secure server that evening would show the CEO's protective stance, captured from Killough's departing perspective, the frame bouncing slightly as the officer walked toward his patrol car, the restaurant's interior visible through the glass door until the angle shifted away. The confrontation's aftermath unfolded in near silence. Other diners returned gradually to their meals, though whispered conversations rippled outward from the Hawthorne family's booth like waves across still water. Phones remained raised at 3 nearby tables, amateur recordings still capturing the scene from multiple angles. The viral footage would begin circulating within hours, shaky smartphone videos showing Langford's intervention and Killough's retreat, though none of those recordings would carry the devastating clarity of the officer's own body camera. Dr. Hawthorne gathered his children closer, one arm around each, while Lisa wiped tears from her face with the cloth napkin that moments before had rested across her lap. Langford approached their booth slowly, his earlier defiance softening into something closer to shared exhaustion and anger. He apologized for what they had experienced in his establishment. Though they all understood he bore no responsibility for Killough's actions. He insisted their meal would be complimentary, and that he would personally ensure this never happened again at any Frank Evans location. What Langford didn't know, what James Hawthorne had never disclosed to anyone beyond his wife and his attorney, was that the man sitting before him owned 47% of the Frank Evans restaurant group. James had invested anonymously 13 years earlier through a complex series of shell companies and trust arrangements, making him the majority shareholder without public attribution. The decision to invest had come after a different humiliation, a different restaurant, a different era when James was establishing his medical practice and trying to expand into business ventures that might build generational wealth for his family. White investors had dismissed him repeatedly, citing vague concerns about market alignment and cultural fit. He had learned to move in shadows, to wield influence without visibility, to protect himself from the bias that attached to his name and face. He exchanged a glance with Langford that carried weight the CEO couldn't fully interpret. James mentioned quietly that he appreciated Langford's leadership and suggested they speak privately in the coming days about ensuring such incidents never recurred at any company location. The phrasing was careful, neutral, offering no hint of the leverage James actually possessed. Langford agreed readily, interpreting the request as a justifiable demand from a victimized customer rather than a directive from the company's primary investor. The family left 20 minutes later, their food barely touched, despite Langford's insistence they stay and eat. Daniel had stopped crying, but remained pressed against his father's side. Sophia asked repeatedly why the police officer had been so angry, what they had done wrong, whether they would be arrested later. The questions every black parent dreads answering. The conversation about racism that comes too early and too often. By Monday morning, the smartphone footage had accumulated 300,000 views across multiple social media platforms. The videos showed the confrontation from civilian perspectives, captured Langford's intervention, documented Killough's threats. Civil rights organizations began amplifying the content, demanding accountability, calling for investigations. Local news stations picked up the story by Monday afternoon, running segments that featured the amateur recordings and interviews with witnesses who had been present. The Hawthorne family filed a formal complaint with the Minneapolis Police Department on Tuesday morning, 4 days after the incident. Lisa handled the filing personally, her legal expertise guiding them through the process with precision. The complaint detailed every moment of discrimination, every threat Killough had made, every instance of racial profiling. It requested a full investigation and disciplinary action. The department's internal affairs unit was required by policy to review all relevant evidence when processing civilian complaints. They requested Killough's body camera footage as part of standard protocol. What they found contradicted Killough's incident report entirely. Killough had written that he responded to a legitimate disturbance call, that the family in question had been loud and disruptive, that they had agreed to leave voluntarily after he explained the complaint, and that the business owner had supported the removal. The report made no mention of Langford contradicting him, no mention of threats against the restaurant, no mention that the family had been entirely peaceful throughout. The body camera footage told a different story entirely. High-definition video with pristine audio, capturing every discriminatory word from Killough's own mouth, every threatening gesture toward both the family and Langford, every moment of the children's fear. It was irrefutable documentation of misconduct, recorded by the department's own equipment, uploaded by Killough himself in what he must have assumed was routine compliance with protocol. The investigation expanded rapidly. Civil rights organizations filed Freedom of Information requests for all of Killough's body camera footage from disturbance calls over the previous 5 years. Discovery revealed a pattern that exceeded even the family's attorney's expectations. Killough had activated his body camera for 112 disturbance or trespassing calls during that period. 81 of those calls involved people of color being removed from businesses, parks, or other public spaces. The footage showed consistent methodology, Killough approaching minorities with immediate assumptions of wrongdoing, demanding removal based on vague complaints, threatening arrest for fabricated violations, In 43 of those cases, business owners or managers appeared on camera, stating there had been no actual disturbance, yet Killough proceeded with removal anyway. In 28 other instances where formal complaints had been filed against Killough, his body camera had mysteriously failed to activate despite department policy requiring it. The pattern was too consistent to dismiss as coincidence. Killough deactivated his camera for interactions he knew might generate accountability, leaving no official record of encounters that witnesses later described as discriminatory, aggressive, or rights-violating. The investigation also uncovered internal departmental communications that proved devastating. Emails between Killough and his lieutenant referenced maintaining standards at upscale establishments. Memos described what they termed clientele curation, a euphemism for removing minorities from predominantly white spaces. The communications revealed institutional knowledge and implicit endorsement of Killough's discriminatory enforcement patterns. James Hawthorne watched the investigation unfold with quiet satisfaction, though he revealed his hidden leverage carefully and strategically. He began by contacting Langford privately, requesting a confidential meeting. When they sat down in Langford's office 1 week after the incident, James disclosed his majority shareholder status and the documentation he had access to through that position. Internal emails, personnel files, customer complaint records that had been suppressed or ignored. The information existed within the company's systems, and James's ownership gave him legal access to all of it. Langford's shock was profound, but quickly transformed into alliance. The CEO had opposed Killough's actions on principle, but now he understood the institutional failure that had enabled such discrimination. Together, they began providing documentation to the civil rights attorneys representing the Hawthorne family. Anonymous internal reports detailing previous incidents at Frank Evans' locations. Correspondence with police department liaisons discussing preferential treatment and response priorities. Evidence of a symbiotic relationship between the restaurant chain and law enforcement that prioritized certain customers over others based on demographics. The U.S. Attorney's Office opened a federal civil rights investigation in late March, 6 weeks after the incident. The case built rapidly, supported by Killough's own body camera footage, testimony from 52 victims who had experienced similar treatment, internal communications exposing institutional bias, and the insider documentation James provided discreetly through legal channels that protected his anonymity while ensuring the evidence reached prosecutors. As this investigation deepened, revealing how one family's courage could dismantle years of systemic discrimination, a question emerges. Should officers who enforce baseless removals to maintain racial exclusivity face federal charges? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Hit that subscribe button if you believe body camera accountability can drive real change. More stories like this are coming. Federal prosecutors indicted Killough and his lieutenant, Ronald Kavanaugh, on multiple civil rights violations in early April. The charges included deprivation of rights under color of law, conspiracy to violate civil rights, and making false statements in official reports. The indictments detailed a pattern spanning 13 years, 81 documented incidents of discriminatory enforcement, and institutional support that enabled the abuse to continue unchecked. Killough rejected all plea negotiations. His attorney maintained that he had been responding to legitimate complaints, following department protocols, and acting within his authority as a law enforcement officer. The defense strategy relied on portraying Killough as a dedicated officer whose actions had been misinterpreted and whose record of service should count in his favor. The body camera footage would make that defense impossible to sustain. The federal trial began on a humid morning in late June, 4 months after Officer Edward Killough had walked into Frank Evans' restaurant and attempted to remove the Hawthorne family from their booth. The courtroom in the federal building downtown filled beyond capacity, with overflow spectators directed to a video feed room on the second floor. Media representatives occupied the first 3 rows of public seating. Civil rights advocates lined the walls. And in the front row, Dr. James Hawthorne sat beside his wife, Lisa, their children at home with family, their presence in the courtroom, a quiet assertion of dignity reclaimed. The prosecution's opening statement lasted 37 minutes and previewed the devastating evidence to come. Assistant U.S. Attorney Patricia Cole explained that the government would present body camera footage not from one incident, but from 20 separate encounters spanning 5 years. The jury would watch Officer Killough's own equipment document a pattern of racial profiling, discriminatory enforcement, and abuse of authority so consistent it could only be described as intentional and systemic. Then the footage began. The courtroom lights dimmed. The large monitor facing the jury flickered to life, and Edward Killough's body camera showed the jury exactly what he had seen, exactly what he had done, in his own recorded words and from his own perspective. The Frank Evans restaurant footage came first. The prosecution played 17 continuous minutes without interruption. The jury watched Killough enter the restaurant, scan the dining room, and walk directly toward the only black family present. They heard him demand removal based on a vague disturbance complaint. They watched the Hawthorne children's faces register fear. They heard Lisa Hawthorne ask what they had done wrong, heard the tremor in Dr. Hawthorne's voice as he tried to understand the accusation. They watched Victor Langford intervene, defend the family, and then become the target of Killough's threats when he refused to participate in the discrimination. The audio was crystal clear. The video was high definition. There was no ambiguity, no room for interpretation. This was discrimination, recorded in perfect detail by the officer's own equipment. But the prosecution didn't stop there. They played footage from 19 additional incidents. Each one followed the same pattern. Killough responding to calls about minorities in public spaces, approaching with immediate assumptions of wrongdoing, demanding removal despite peaceful behavior, threatening arrest for fabricated violations. In multiple cases, business owners or managers appeared on camera stating clearly that there had been no disturbance. Yet Killough proceeded anyway, his authority weaponized against people whose only offense was existing in spaces where their presence made someone uncomfortable. The jury watched for 3 days as victim after victim took the stand. 52 people testified about their encounters with Killough, a black professor removed from a coffee shop while grading papers, a Latino family ejected from a public park during a birthday party, an Asian couple ordered out of a bookstore while browsing. Each victim described the humiliation, the fear, the helplessness of being targeted by law enforcement for activities that should have been unremarkable, and each testimony was corroborated by Killough's own body camera footage. On the 4th day of trial, the prosecution introduced evidence that transformed the case from individual misconduct into institutional failure. Internal emails between Killough and Lieutenant Kavanaugh discussing clientele curation strategies, departmental memos outlining preferential response protocols for certain neighborhoods and establishments, performance evaluations praising Killough for maintaining community standards, a euphemism that became transparent when cross-referenced with his body camera footage showing whom he removed and from where. Then came the revelation that shifted everything. The prosecution called Dr. James Hawthorne to the stand. The questioning began routinely, establishing his credentials as a physician, his family's experience at Frank Evans' restaurant, the trauma his children had suffered. But then, Assistant U.S. Attorney Cole asked about his relationship to the restaurant chain. James explained carefully that 13 years earlier, after facing discrimination in his attempts to secure business investments, he had begun investing anonymously through legal structures designed to protect his identity. Over time, those investments had grown. He had become the majority shareholder in the Frank Evans Restaurant Group, holding 47% ownership, while maintaining complete anonymity to avoid the bias that had blocked him previously. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. The judge called for order. Killough's defense attorney objected strenuously, though the objection had no legal basis since the information was factual and relevant to establishing James's access to internal documentation. James continued. His ownership position gave him legal access to all company records, communications, and files. When the investigation began, he had exercised that access discreetly, providing documents through his attorneys to civil rights organizations and eventually to federal prosecutors. The evidence included correspondence between Frank Evans' management and the police department, establishing a symbiotic relationship that prioritized removing certain customers based on demographic profiling. It included internal complaints that had been suppressed when minority customers reported discrimination by staff or police. It included emails showing that Killough's pattern of enforcement at Frank Evans' locations was known to management and quietly encouraged as a way of maintaining the desired clientele composition. The revelation accomplished multiple purposes. It explained how prosecutors had obtained such comprehensive internal documentation. It demonstrated that the discrimination extended beyond one officer to institutional complicity involving both the police department and private businesses. And it transformed the narrative from victimization to empowerment, showing how someone underestimated and undervalued had quietly accumulated power and then wielded it strategically to dismantle the system that had oppressed him. Killough's defense collapsed under the weight of evidence his own technology had created. His attorney attempted to argue that the body camera footage lacked context, that Killough had been responding to legitimate complaints, that his intent had been public safety rather than discrimination. But the footage was too clear, the pattern too consistent, the institutional support too well documented. The jury wasn't convinced by arguments that contradicted what they could see and hear for themselves. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned guilty verdicts on all counts for Officer Edward Killough. He was convicted of deprivation of rights under color of law, conspiracy to violate civil rights, and making false statements in official reports. Lieutenant Ronald Kavanaugh was convicted on conspiracy charges and obstruction for his role in dismissing complaints and protecting Killough from accountability. The sentencing hearing occurred 6 weeks later. Killough showed no remorse, maintaining to the end that he had been performing his duties appropriately. The federal judge sentenced him to 4 years in federal prison, citing the extensive pattern of abuse, the institutional betrayal of public trust, and the particular harm inflicted on children who witnessed their parents being terrorized by law enforcement. Kavanaugh received 18 months, but the criminal convictions were only one dimension of accountability. The civil lawsuit filed by the Hawthorne family against Killough, Kavanaugh, and the Minneapolis Police Department proceeded in parallel. The defendants' attorneys recognized quickly that the body camera footage made their position indefensible. Settlement negotiations began before trial, culminating in a $7 million resolution that included both monetary damages and comprehensive reforms. The settlement mandated immediate changes to body camera policies. All footage would be subject to AI-monitored audits, flagging patterns of discriminatory language, disparate enforcement, or policy violations. Community review panels with subpoena power would examine footage and officer conduct quarterly, with authority to recommend disciplinary action. Officers who failed to activate cameras during required interactions would face immediate suspension, pending investigation. The agreement established a $7 million restitution fund for victims of Killough's previous discriminatory enforcement. Advertisements ran in local media, inviting anyone who had been removed from public spaces by Killough to file claims supported by witness statements, contemporaneous complaints, or any available documentation. The settlement also required demographic tracking for all disturbance calls and enforcement actions. The data would be analyzed quarterly to identify officers showing patterns of disparate treatment based on race, ethnicity, or other protected characteristics. Zero-tolerance policies were implemented for discriminatory enforcement, with termination as the presumptive consequence for substantiated violations. Beyond the Minneapolis Police Department, the case generated ripple effects across law enforcement agencies nationally. The body camera footage circulated widely in police training contexts as a definitive example of how not to conduct enforcement, how bias manifests in real-world interactions, and how technology designed to protect officers can also document their misconduct. Civil rights organizations cited the case in litigation across 12 states, using Killough's conviction and the settlement terms as precedent for demanding similar accountability mechanisms. The Hawthorne family used their portion of the settlement to establish the Hawthorne Justice Initiative, a non-profit organization providing pro bono legal representation and investigative support to victims of discrimination. The organization focused specifically on cases involving body camera footage or other documentary evidence, recognizing that such recordings could be powerful tools for accountability when properly analyzed and presented. Within its first year, the initiative supported 37 discrimination cases, securing favorable outcomes in 29. Frank Evans' restaurant underwent its own transformation. Victor Langford, working with James Hawthorne in his revealed capacity as majority shareholder, implemented comprehensive anti-discrimination training for all staff. They established anonymous reporting systems for customers and employees to flag discriminatory treatment. They severed the preferential relationship with law enforcement, making clear that police would be called only for legitimate safety threats, never for removing customers based on discomfort with their presence. The restaurant's reputation shifted from exclusionary to inclusive, and business thrived under policies that welcomed everyone. As for Edward Killough, he began serving his federal sentence at FCI Sandstone in Minnesota. He maintained his innocence throughout, refusing to participate in programs requiring acknowledgement of wrongdoing. His appeals were denied at every level, courts finding no error in the overwhelming evidence that convicted him, evidence recorded by his own body camera, uploaded by his own hand, preserved by the very system he had trusted to protect him. The irony was profound and complete. The technology implemented to shield officers from false accusations had become the instrument of Killough's undoing. His own equipment had documented his bias with clarity. No witness testimony could match. His own recordings had exposed a pattern. No defense strategy could explain away. The device he had worn as protection had been his betrayer, though in truth, it had simply been a mirror, reflecting his actions back to the world with perfect accuracy. The Hawthorne family rebuilt their sense of safety gradually. The children required counseling to process the trauma of watching their parents threatened with arrest for eating breakfast. But over time, supported by therapists and community, Sophia and Daniel came to understand that what happened was not their fault, not their family's fault, but the result of prejudice that many people were working to dismantle. They learned that their father's quiet power, accumulated through years of strategic investment and anonymous influence, had helped create accountability where none had existed before. They learned that silence could be strategic, that power didn't always announce itself, and that justice sometimes required patience and careful planning. Dr. James Hawthorne continued his medical practice, his majority ownership of Frank Evans' restaurant no longer secret but acknowledged openly. The revelation had initially worried him. Would it expose him to the bias he had spent years avoiding? But the context mattered. He hadn't been discovered. He had chosen disclosure as a strategic tool for justice. And the community response was supportive, recognizing his investment as both business acumen and quiet resistance against the barriers that had tried to exclude him. Lisa Hawthorne expanded her legal practice to include civil rights work, inspired by the case and the power of documentary evidence. She frequently collaborated with the Justice Initiative, lending her expertise to cases where body camera footage or other recordings could establish discrimination that might otherwise be dismissed as subjective interpretation. The story became a case study, a teaching tool, a warning, and an inspiration. It demonstrated that everyday racism remained pervasive in spaces as ordinary as restaurants. It showed that institutional bias is protected officers who weaponized their authority to enforce racial exclusion. It proved that body cameras, implemented for one purpose, could serve accountability when their footage was actually examined rather than buried. It illustrated the power of allyship when Victor Langford chose to defend the family rather than defer to law enforcement. And it revealed how quiet power, strategically accumulated and carefully deployed, could dismantle systems designed to keep certain people powerless. 3 years after that Saturday morning at Frank Evans' restaurant, the dining room remained busy with weekend crowds. Families of all backgrounds sat in booths and at tables, eating brunch, celebrating occasions, simply existing in a space that had been the site of discrimination, but had transformed into something better. The body camera footage that had documented that discrimination had been viewed millions of times, a permanent record of what happened and what followed. Edward Killough remained incarcerated, his release date still 2 years distant, his appeals exhausted, his career destroyed by his own recorded words. The technology that was supposed to protect him had told the truth about what he had done, and the truth had been devastating. Not because the technology betrayed him, but because it had been honest when he had been discriminatory, transparent when he had been deceptive, and preserving when he had hoped for erasure. Justice had come not as spectacle, but as method. Documentation, investigation, prosecution, conviction, settlement, reform. Each step deliberate, each outcome built on evidence that couldn't be disputed because it came from the perpetrator's own equipment. And in that process, a family that had been humiliated and threatened had found not just vindication, but transformation, turning their trauma into systemic change, their vulnerability into power, and their experience into a blueprint for accountability that extended far beyond their own case. The Hawthorne Justice Initiative continued its work, one case at a time, one body camera recording at a time, one instance of discrimination at a time, building a record of accountability that technology had made possible and that courage had made real.